You get your pairings, you find out who your opponent is, and then you find out I'm your judge, and I'll be in the back, and I'll be flowing. Generally speaking, you'll look at my paradigm, figure out if the arguments that you like are things I'll vote on, and then you will go into the round adapting your arguments to me to make sure I'll vote on it. But what happens if I don't vote on your argument, even though you've run the arguments that you are most comfortable with and I'm most comfortable evaluating in that round? Well, one of those things is probably you failed to meet the threshold I required in order to get my ballot for the arguments you run in front of me. So how do you check those thresholds? And how do you know what they are when you are a debater in front of a judge? In this video, I'll be doing a quick review of that and how to do it. So what is a threshold? Well, for me, and especially as a judge in debate, a threshold is what level of argumentation is required from you as a debater in order for me to be able to evaluate the argument and compare it to other arguments in the round to see whether or not I will vote on it. I.e., if you go for a offensive argument versus the other team, how well fleshed out does that argument need to be? I.e., can you only go for it if the other team just drops it? Do you need to go for a full impact calc to see a comparison between the affirmative and negative world? Or is just like a basic, extension of the argument if they concede it enough, right? These are the things that paradigms are usually very, very good for, and they'll tell you exactly what you need to do in order to win that flow in front of that judge. So let's take an example for me. I have a decently middle to high threshold on theory. I'll vote on theory, and I've voted on theory plenty of times, but I just won't give you the ballot, even if they concede the theory debate, if you don't fully extend the shell and your shell has all the necessary components for me to vote on it, right? I.e., your shell should include an interpretation, a violation, and reasons to prefer, and then maybe a fleshed out argument or two if you're going to go for it in your last rebuttal. If your shell does not include that when you extend it, especially if it's dropped, even if it's dropped, I probably will not evaluate it. Now, is that true for every judge? No, absolutely not. I have seen judges vote on a dropped argument, even though they just said they dropped this theory argument, they should lose, right? Even though there was no extension of a violation or reasons to prefer for that theoretical argument. This is one of those things about judge adaptation that debaters need to look at. What is my threshold for that argument that you're going to go for the winning 2NR or 2AR? Will you meet it? And this is especially important in panels because not every judge evaluates the same argument the same way. So if you're going to go for an argument that you know you should win, you need to fully flesh it out to make sure you cover the threshold of all the judges in the round in front of you so that you don't leave any loopholes open within the paradigm for the judge to be like, I'm sorry, I can't evaluate it. It's not fully fleshed out. I don't know what else to tell you, right? This is the same thing for a critique. Some judges are okay with a quick extension of the critique, especially if it's not handled correctly. But I require a full fleshed out link argumentation debate, theory of power, impacts, the root cause stuff, as well as the alternative and how does the alternative do anything, and whether or not I get to evaluate the AF versus the alternative in a world of the permutation, or impact versus impact, right? I need all those bases covered. If you don't and you concede one of them and I just don't have a full fleshed out like one of those pillars of the critique for me to vote on, then I don't know if I will vote on the critique. I'm more than likely okay with voting AF on presumption or even on the permutation. It's just one of those, do you have all the checklists figured out for that particular judge and can you go about it? Now, how do you know if your judge has a threshold on something if their paradigm doesn't say so, right? This is one of those things where networking helps. If you have friends that are debaters that have been in front of this judge before, you may want to ask them, can I go for this argument? And will they buy, say, circumvention as an offensive argument in a 2NR versus an affirmative that concedes it? Or is it seen as just solvency deficit and a defensive argument in a world where there is overwhelming, impacts coming from the affirmative. It's just one of those things like, how do I get them to evaluate this argument? And if they have seen them, then they can tell you, and you can get some insights, or it will just require experience in front of that judge, right? There's not a lot of judges for LD that are good for every sort of like debater. So there's certain compromises debaters need to make in terms of their judge prefs, and knowing how your judges feel about how they evaluate your arguments is a good metric as you get experience in how you do your preps. And having judge notes after every round, which is covered in the other LD videos, will help you on that mission, right? Just because you think it's a good argument does not mean the judge will vote on your argument. Make sure your arguments always adhere to what the threshold of a judge is willing to evaluate. That being said, sometimes it's not even just like the threshold. Sometimes it's just understanding your judge. And can your judge understand you? Vice versa, right? If you understand and you're getting good feedback from your judges with like head nods and they're smiling, that generally means you don't really have to adapt anything in the round, right? You're doing a good job of what you're doing. You're getting feedback on the fly from the judge as to like, how are you debating in the round? If you see your judge suffering, i.e. they look confused, they're not flowing as much, they have like a frown, or they're shaking their head, this is probably one of those like, you gotta adapt and probably not go for this argument, or you gotta change your approach in this argument, right? I have a slight hearing problem. If you're going 375, 400 words in front of me, there is a pretty good chance I'm not gonna flow all your arguments. I'm going to miss about half of them, if not more, because you're just too fast, right? And this is straight up on top of my paradigm about like, I do have a hearing problem. Please keep that in mind. Have I had debaters adjust to this? Yes, 100%. I've had a lot of debaters adjust to this to not go full spread, or if they do, they give me the time allocation necessary to get to their voice, to be used to how they like to speak in order for me to adapt to them and not make it so difficult on my end. Have I had debaters also not adhere to this? Yes, I've had debaters just go 100%. I miss the first 30 seconds, and then they go for those first 30 seconds in the last speech, and I'm like, I don't know what that is on my flow. Sorry, I can't evaluate, right? If your judge has a hearing problem, please adhere to it. If you're online, just assume that you're going to go about 75 to 50% for the first 45 seconds of your speech, and then you can go faster, right? This is judge adaptation. It's also just like common courtesy to figure out what your judge can and cannot evaluate in terms of, from a human perspective, as well from an ideological perspective, and debate on that. Now, will some judges adjust to you? Definitely, right? Definitely, because this is not just like you have to do all the adjustments. Judges will also adapt to some certain arguments if they're not super familiar with it. They'll get read up on it and they'll learn about it. And so that the next time you run that argument in front of them, they'll be a little bit better on how to evaluate it, or they'll just straight up tell you that this is probably not one of those things that they're very common with, and this is how you need to say it in front of them. And so they're willing to teach you how to get to them, so you don't have to adjust as much, so that it's easier for you to get a ballot from them, right? Good judges are willing to help you out. Bad judges are not. Prep those good judges and keep them in the back and be nice to them, because they'll be with you for a long time in your career. That's all I got to say. Thank you for showing up today. Bye-bye.